Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah hums with fluorescent lights casting green shadows across linoleum floors, the smell of antiseptic mixing with cafeteria coffee and something underneath, the copper tang of blood nobody quite washed away. Elena Martinez moves through the corridors with deliberate invisibility, her scrubs loose enough to hide the limp in her left leg, her badge clipped low where nobody looks twice. 6 months she's been emptying bedpans here. 6 months of becoming furniture. The ICU wing on third shift is quietest around 2:19 a.m. That's when the heart monitors sound like ticking clocks and the ventilators breathe for people who can't. Elena changes for bags with a kind of precision that makes orderlies stop mid-conversation and ask her opinion before they consult the residents. They don't know why. She just moves like someone who understands what a body needs before it tells her. Dr. Mercer notices everything. That's the problem. He stands in the doorway of room 312, watching her adjust a patient's sodium drip, watching her hands move with the terrifying fluid precision of a surgeon who learned in fields where mistakes meant body bags. Her knuckles are scarred. Not the delicate surgical scars of a resident, but the thick white webbing of someone who sutured flesh in the dark with field materials and prayer. He sees the scars. He decides they don't mean anything. "You're reading the drip rate wrong," he says. Not a question. A correction. Elena doesn't flinch. Doesn't blink. She adjusts the 4/3 of a milliliter and watches the monitor. 75 milliliters per hour maintains renal perfusion without fluid overload. I didn't ask for an explanation from the orderly. His voice like a tank idling in a garage, low, heavy, waiting to move. You changed it. That's the resident's call. She continues working. The monitor beeps its steady rhythm. Steady. Still. Waiting. Dr. Mercer's right hand trembles as he signs the chart. Just slightly. The tremor travels from his wrist to his fingers like a seizure trying to finish itself. He notices her noticing. This is the moment where most people look away, offer mercy, pretend they didn't see. Elena holds his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough that he knows she counted the milliseconds. Your shift ends in 20 minutes, he says, walking away. There's a supply closet on 2 that needs restocking. It's an order. It's also a reminder. You don't belong here. You'll never belong here. She finishes the forecheck. Documents the time, 2:22. Moves to the next room. The combat medic arrives with the shrapnel wound just after 3 a.m. His name is Specialist James Clayton from Fort Bragg, attached to the 82nd Airborne, and he's been riding in an ambulance for 40 minutes with embedded copper fragments the size of fingernail clippings working their way deeper into his calf with every bump in the road. The ER trauma team moves him to Bay 4. They're efficient. They're also crowded. A car accident 3 streets over has diverted trauma attention, and the resident on call is 15 minutes behind schedule. Elena pushes the supply cart past the bay and stops. Doesn't move forward. Doesn't move back. Just stops. The wound is already infected. She can see the inflammation spreading like a bruise that forgot to be purple, turning to shades of grey-red that mean sepsis is considering an audition. The attending surgeon, Dr. Paulson, is somewhere in the hospital. The resident, someone named Fletcher, is still scrubbing in from the previous trauma. They have maybe 4 minutes before someone needs to debride this or lose the leg. I can start cleaning it, Elena says. Not an offer. Not a request. A statement of fact. Dr. Paulson's head comes up. He's about to refuse. She's an orderly. She has no business touching an open wound, but then he sees her hands. The way they're already moving. The way she reaches for the forceps like an instrument recognizes the person who knows how to use it. Fine. Clean around the entry point only. Don't. But she's already moving. The tweezer's in her right hand. Gauze in her left. She's not yanking fragments out like a plumber clearing a drain. She's working along the wound tract, understanding the geometry of how metal embeds itself in human tissue, following the path of least trauma. The movements are small. Precise. Someone taught her to do this in places where infection meant death and hospitals were things you only saw in stories people told before they died. Specialist Clayton watches her work. His eyes are locked on her hands. His breathing, which was ragged before, starts to match hers, slower, intentional, the kind of breathing people do when they're in the presence of someone who knows what they're doing. "I know that needle work," he whispers. The words are so quiet the monitor almost covers them. "Who taught you field sutures?" Elena doesn't answer. She finishes the debridement. Steps back. Documents the work on the chart with a timestamp, 3:14. "You can go," Dr. Paulson says, but he's frowning. That was efficient. She leaves the tweezers in the surgical tray. Walks out. Doesn't explain. Doesn't need to. Dr. Mercer is waiting by the coffee station when she passes. Not waiting for coffee. Waiting for her. He's holding his tremoring right hand with his left, trying to hide the shaking like a man hiding a gun he stole. "That patient had an open contaminated wound," he says. "You contaminated it further by using non-sterile technique." Elena pours coffee into a cup marked with someone else's name. Hospital coffee tastes like pennies and regret. The wound was already contaminated. Secondary bacterial load at 48 hours post-trauma is inevitable. Early aggressive debridement reduces amputation risk by 37%. She sips the coffee. Doesn't react to the taste. You can check the literature if you want. Journal of Trauma, 2019. His jaw tightens. The tremor in his hand becomes more pronounced. He's a surgeon who can't steady his own hand. He's watching her, a woman with correspondence school credentials and scars that tell stories he can't read, move through his hospital like she owns the building. "You're an orderly, Miss Martinez. You empty bedpans. You stock supplies. You do not provide medical assessment or intervention. You understand the hierarchy here." "Yes, doctor." Her voice is soft. Deferential. The voice of someone who knows her place. But her eyes are the color of a stormy Atlantic, and they're looking at him like he's a problem someone else is going to have to solve. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead. One flickers. Dies. Comes back to life. Dr. Mercer walks away. His right hand shaking. His mind already working on the problem of how to reorganize the hierarchy so that orderlies don't make residents look inadequate just by showing up. Back in the break room, Elena folds a patient's jacket carefully, the one left in bay for during intake. Her fingers brush the inside lining. The faded unit patch is still there. Still sewn tight. Special Forces. Hindu Kush Theatre. A call sign stitched below the patch in thread that's faded to almost nothing, Valkyrie 6. She tucks the jacket under her arm. Places it in the lost and found. Doesn't look back. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part hadn't started yet. The grand round started like every Friday at Cedar Creek Medical, Dr. Mercer leading 18 medical students through the cardiac ward in a formation that moved like a surgical team clearing a room. Elena was changing and in room 347 when she heard the footsteps. She didn't look up. The bag of normal saline hung steady from her left hand while her right adjusted the line with the precision of someone who had done this under fire, literally, in places where a trembling hand meant the difference between a patient living through the next hour or not. The students filed in like ducklings, notebooks already open, ready to absorb whatever gospel their attending would deliver. Dr. Mercer surveyed the scene, Elena 3 feet away, her back to the group, her scarred hands moving with an efficiency that made expensive surgical training look optional. His jaw tightened. "Gather around, everyone," he said, and the students obeyed. "Notice the technique here. This is what happens when we let anyone with a correspondence degree touch patients. Adequate, perhaps, for a veterinary assistant. Notice the angle of entry, tentative, untested, frankly dangerous in a critical care environment." Elena's hands didn't pause. The 4 hung perfect. The drip rate calibrated to exactly 50 milliliters per hour. She turned to face the group, and her eyes met Mercer's with the kind of cold stare that made the room's air pressure change. No anger. No shame. Just observation, like she was cataloguing something she'd need to remember. He kept talking for 90 more seconds, his voice climbing slightly, waiting for her to flinch, to redden, to retreat. She stood still. When he finally stopped, she turned back to her work, already dismissing him from her mind entirely. The students exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a thin kid from Johns Hopkins, opened his mouth as if to ask something, then thought better of it. Mercer herded them out, and Elena heard his voice fade down the corridor, already moving on to the next teaching moment, the next opportunity to establish dominance over a room full of people who would remember every word he said about her as if it were engraved in stone. The vending machine in the break room hummed its constant electronic drone. Elena had timed her coffee run to 2:19 p.m., the window when the space emptied out between shift changes. But Rachel and Kim were still there, blocking the front, mid-conversation about something that died the instant they saw her approaching. The silence came fast. Elena walked past them without acknowledgement, fed $2 into the machine's slot, and waited for the cold brown liquid to dispense. Rachel and Kim stared at the countertop with sudden intense interest. Then Mercer appeared from the hallway with the precision of a man who had been waiting for his moment, who had orchestrated this timing down to the minute. He leaned between the two nurses, close enough that they had to shift their weight, and whispered something while maintaining direct eye contact with Elena across the break room. She felt it. The weight of being looked at like a target. Rachel and Kim's faces underwent an immediate transformation. They exploded into laughter, the kind that comes from relief and social alignment, the sound of two people remembering that their loyalty to the group mattered more than friendship with someone the group had decided to reject. They laughed while their eyes darted toward Elena, then away, then down. Elena's jaw locked. The coffee cup emerged from the machine with a plastic clatter. She picked it up, turned toward the door, and caught her reflection in the darkened window of the refrigerator. For just a moment, thin as a razor, she saw what they saw. An orderly in the wrong clothes, with hands that didn't belong to someone with a correspondence degree, with scars that told stories that didn't fit in a hospital hierarchy. Then that moment passed. She walked out and left the sound of their laughter behind, a noise she decided not to carry with her past the threshold. The supply closet smelled like bleach and something sharper underneath, the chemical burn of antiseptic designed to kill everything. Elena was stocking for bags on Thursday afternoon when Mercer found her there, blocking the narrow doorway with his body so that leaving would require acknowledgement, would require her to ask permission or push past him. He'd been waiting all week for something. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. "I've been hearing complaints," he said. The closet was small. His voice had nowhere to go but directly at her. Nurses playing doctor. Giving unauthorized medical advice. Overstepping their credentials. Elena continued stocking. Left hand placing, right hand securing. The repetition of it was almost meditative. "Next time I catch you crossing that line, I'm calling security personally. They'll escort you out of this building. Do we understand each other? Correspondence." He waited. The endorphins were visible in his face, the high that comes from power deployed without resistance. He was a man who had spent 6 months training himself to expect submission, who had constructed an entire narrative around her incompetence, who had gathered 18 medical students as witnesses to her inferiority. And he was still hungry. Elena finished stocking the last 4 bags. She turned to face him, and her eyes were the color of slate after rain, empty of everything except observation. When she spoke, her voice came out like a scalpel, sharp and clean and exactly right. "Your tremor's getting worse," she said. "You switched the propranolol to your left pocket so your right hand steadies for signatures." Mercer's face went white. Then red. The color climbed from his neck like someone was turning up the thermostat on his entire nervous system. Elena walked past him, not around him, past him, her shoulder nearly brushing his as she exited the supply closet. Behind her, she heard the sound of his breathing, loud and irregular, like an engine that had just realized it was stalling. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, everything would change. The blind veteran arrived at 6:06 a.m., and the admission note was written in the clinical language of someone who had already decided he was unsavable. The paramedics had found him in an alley off Victory Drive with a fever of 104.1 degrees and a shrapnel wound that had stopped being clean approximately 4 days ago. The infection had spread like wildfire through tissue that shouldn't have been touched by anything except surgical technique and prayer. Elena read the chart at the nurse's station while the admit team was still running fluids. BP 80/40ths and dropping. Temperature climbing. Respiration shallow enough that the ventilator would need to be on standby. The kind of patient that made experienced nurses start calculating triage and comfort care protocols instead of emergency intervention. Staff nurse Jen took one look at the body on the gurney and shook her head. Septic shock. Look at the labs, white count is 34, lactate is 8.2, he's circling the drain hard. I'm not putting my license on a corpse. Maya from the ICU refused the case before it was even formally offered. Then Sandra. Then the night shift nurse who had gone home 2 hours earlier and was already too far away to care. Elena stood at the edge of the admit bay and watched the veteran's hand trembling against the gurney rail. His other hand clutched a jacket, the fabric worn soft by time and handling, the seams coming loose on one side. Inside the lining, just barely visible, was a faded unit patch. 82nd Airborne. Same deployment window as the one she'd seen in the break room. The same desert. The same mountains. The same place where Captain Elena Martinez had died officially, had stopped existing on paper while her body kept walking around in hallways. Dr. Mercer appeared at 7:14 a.m. like a bird of prey locating movement in tall grass. He reviewed the chart in silence, and Elena watched his face calculate the risk-benefit analysis. A blind homeless patient with catastrophic sepsis. No insurance. No family listed. No advocates. Comfort care protocol, he announced. He's too far gone. We're not wasting resources on a procedure that won't change outcome. Elena was already moving toward the supply cart, already running calculations through the part of her brain that didn't belong in a hospital with a correspondence degree. Septic shock at this stage meant 90 minutes, maybe less, before organ cascade became irreversible. The infection pattern suggested MRSA or something worse, something that had been festering long enough to cross every barrier. But the vital signs weren't yet unsurvivable. The window hadn't closed. She started running a central line, her hands moving with the muscle memory of 1,000 crisis situations in places where there was no such thing as comfort care protocol, just live or die, and the person holding the needle decided which one it would be. Mercer's voice dropped to the register that made the room go quiet. Stand down, correspondence. Or I'll have your badge by noon. The veteran's monitor alarmed, a sharp, insistent beeping that meant his BP had just crashed to 70/35. Elena heard the sound of his breathing shift to something shallower, something that sounded like the machine giving up before the body had actually finished fighting. An orderly whispered, fever just spiked to 106.8. And then the room went absolutely silent, the kind of silence where everyone was waiting to see if Elena would follow the order or if she would make the choice that would end her career the way it had already ended once before, in a different desert, in a different lifetime. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she could already see the next 90 minutes unfolding like a map, could already feel the decision crystallizing in her chest. The patient's hand was still trembling. Still clutching that jacket. Still wearing the ghosts of the same war that had made her invisible. The blind veteran arrived on a Wednesday morning, shaking so violently that the stretcher beneath him rattled like loose machinery. His skin had taken on that particular grey that meant sepsis, not the kind of sick that hospitals fixed with antibiotics and rest, but the kind that killed you if the next 90 minutes went perfectly. Fever spiked at 104. Then 105. Then the mercury climbed past 106 like it had nowhere else to go. The intake nurse, a woman named Cassandra who'd worked trauma for 8 years, took one look at the tremor in his hands and the smell of infection pouring off his bandages and said, "Not taking this one. Call someone else." She wasn't being cruel. She was being honest. The infection had marched through tissue like an occupying army. His left shoulder bore the scars of something catastrophic, surgery that had been done wrong or done late or done by someone who hadn't known what they were doing. Elena saw him being wheeled past the supply closet where she was restocking trauma kits, and something in her chest seized. Not emotion. Recognition. Pain was information, and this man's body was screaming. 2 other nurses refused after Cassandra. The attending physician on call that morning was Dr. Marcus Sterling, a resident who'd learned medicine in textbooks and had the clinical instincts of a parking meter. He looked at the vitals and said, "Comfort care protocol. Get him morphine and let's manage the pain." Translation, we're watching him die. Elena moved to the crash cart. She'd been moving toward it since she saw the patient's oxygen saturation on the monitor, 88%, and falling like a stone dropped into deep water. Her hands knew what to do. Her hands had always known. 83%. 80%. The veteran's breathing had shifted into that shallow, desperate pattern that meant his lungs were filling with fluid, that the infection had breached the barrier between sepsis and organ failure. 78%. She was pulling the defibrillator pads from the crash cart when Dr. Mercer appeared in the doorway like something summoned by her own need to stop her. His expression was perfectly controlled, which meant his rage was nuclear. "Step away from that cart," he said. Not a request. A command delivered with the kind of tone that expected obedience the way gravity expects falling things. "The patient is declining," Elena said. Her voice remained level, utterly professional. Just a nurse doing her job. Just someone who knew the difference between comfort care and manslaughter. His O2 is at 78. Lungs are filling. He needs intervention. Mercer moved between her and the crash cart with the smooth confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone without institutional authority. "I'm the attending physician, and I'm ordering comfort care. Touch that cart and you're finished. Security will escort you out before lunch." Behind him, on the monitor, the oxygen saturation hit 72%. The veteran's heart rate climbed to 148. The room had that particular thickness that meant everyone was watching and no one was moving. Elena met Mercer's eyes with the kind of stare that came from someone who'd looked at far worse than a threatened career. She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. She reached past him and grabbed the crash cart anyway. The wheels squeaked across the tile floor like the sound of something breaking. Mercer's face went pale, then red, then the color of something dying. He shouted for security before she'd moved 3 feet. "Call security to Trauma Bay 3. Code enforcement." His voice cracked on the last word. Elena was already moving the cart to the veteran's bedside, her hands establishing peripheral for access with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory trained into neural pathways by 3 decades of practice. 2 lines in. 1 in the left arm, 1 in the right. Mercer pulled his phone out of his pocket like a weapon. "This is Dr. Mercer. I need to speak with Chairman Phillips. It's urgent. We have a credential violation happening right now in Trauma 3. His voice had shifted into that cold, professional tone people used when they were calling in debts. The line connected. Elena could hear Phillips's voice on the other end, something cheerful, something that changed immediately when Mercer said, "We have a nurse practicing medicine without a license. Elena Martinez. I need her removed from the facility immediately. I'm requesting an investigation into her credentials. I believe they're falsified." The oxygen saturation dropped to 65%. The veteran's lungs were failing. His body was running out of time. Elena prepped the anesthesia, propofol pushed for 1.5 milligrams per kilogram, and succinylcholine to paralyze the muscles, and then she was moving him supine, tilting the bed back, preparing for emergency airway intervention. Mercer made his second call before she'd even reached for the endotracheal tube. "Georgia Nursing Board. This is Dr. Marcus Mercer at Cedar Creek Medical. I'm requesting an immediate fraud investigation into one of our nurses. Elena Martinez. Martinez. I have serious concerns about her certification. I believe it's falsified. I need this processed as high priority. The monitor showed the veteran's oxygen saturation at 60%. The cardiac rhythm was deteriorating. His blood pressure had crashed to 70/40. Elena grabbed a size 8 endotracheal tube and moved with the kind of speed that came from having done this before, in field hospitals with inadequate light and inadequate time and no margin for error. The tube slid past his vocal cords on the first attempt, a skill that took months to learn and lifetimes to master. She secured it with tape. Bagged the tube manually until the ventilator could take over. Mercer was making his third call, his voice tight now, furious. "This is Dr. Mercer. I need to hire your firm. I need a complete background investigation on a nurse named Elena Martinez. Employment history, everything. I need it deep. I think her past is falsified. There are gaps. Too many gaps." He paused. "Whatever your rate is, bill my personal card. I need this done by tomorrow." The veteran's lungs were flooding. Elena could see it on the monitor. The oxygen saturation was crashing despite the intubation because the fluid inside his chest cavity was preventing the lungs from expanding, preventing oxygen from reaching his bloodstream. There was only one intervention left. One procedure. One choice between protocol and survival. The crash cart had everything. She grabbed a 14-gauge needle, long enough to reach the pleural space, sharp enough to cut through skin and muscle and connective tissue without hesitation. The second intercostal space, midclavicular line. The textbook location. Her hands moved like they belonged to someone else, like they were executing instructions written into muscle memory by years and wars and operating rooms where there was no time to think. She prepped the skin with antiseptic. The smell of alcohol swabbed across pale flesh. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping. 70% of the pressure inside the chest releasing in a single breath. The oxygen saturation began climbing. 72. 75. 80. The rhythm on the monitor steadied. The blood pressure rose. The veteran's body was still, unconscious, stabilized by medication and intervention and the kind of skill that wasn't supposed to exist in an orderly who'd been restocking supplies 6 hours earlier. But the veteran wasn't conscious for any of it. He didn't know she was the reason he wasn't dead. Dr. Mercer was staring at her with an expression that looked like watching someone reveal a weapon they'd been hiding the entire time. Elena was preparing to move the veteran to ICU when the security guard arrived, a young kid named Didnt who'd always been kind to her in the hallway. He looked confused. He looked at Mercer. He looked at Elena. He looked at the ventilator and the 4 lines and the evidence of a trauma intervention that had absolutely just saved a human being's life. "So," Didnt said to Mercer. "I'm not sure what you need me to escort her from the building," Mercer said. His voice had taken on that brittle quality of something stretched too thin. "She's not authorized to perform medical interventions. She violated protocol and hospital policy. Remove her. Now." Elena didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply pulled off the latex gloves and stepped back from the crash cart and walked past Didnt with the kind of composure that came from understanding you were already a ghost. The hospital had just begun the process of erasing her. She just didn't know yet that the Pentagon had already been erasing her for 18 years, and that the erasure was about to reverse itself in ways that would end careers and bring colonels to bedside salutes. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Dr. Mercer didn't know. The worst part was that the blind veteran he'd tried to let die was clutching that faded jacket in his unconscious hands, the one with the unit patch sewn inside the lining, and that patch bore a call sign he recognized. Valkyrie 6. A name whispered over a compromised radio during an extraction he'd survived only because someone in the dark had stitched him up with hands that knew exactly where to cut, exactly when to move, exactly how to keep him breathing when everything else had failed. By the time the sun set on Cedar Creek Medical, 3 separate investigations had been initiated. By the time Elena sat in her car in the parking lot with the rain hammering down like applause, 3 phone calls had been made to people who didn't forget faces or names or the hands that had saved their lives. By the time she understood what was coming, it was already too late to stop it. The ICU nurse made notes on the veteran's chart at 2:17 a.m. Vitals climbing. O2 sat now 94%. Heart rhythm steady. His blind eyes moved beneath closed eyelids, REM sleep, the first sign his body believed it would survive the night. His right hand still gripped the jacket, fingers wrapped around the faded unit patch sewn into the lining, the only piece of his old life he'd brought to Cedar Creek Medical. Nobody asked him why he held it like a lifeline. Nobody asked about the call sign embroidered there in faded thread, Valkyrie 6. 3 floors below, the locker room was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical requiem. Elena's locker stood open, untouched since she'd clocked out at 1:11 a.m., still smelling faintly of antiseptic and rain. A white envelope was taped to the metal door. No name on the front. She found it at 1:52 a.m., her wet scrubs still clinging to her shoulders, her hand steady as she opened it. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. Pending credentials review by the Georgia Nursing Board and Hospital Administration. Report to HR on Monday at 9 a.m. for formal questioning. Do not enter Cedar Creek Medical without written authorization. The letter was signed by 3 people she'd never met. She didn't read it twice. She didn't crumple it. She folded it once, placed it back in the envelope, and walked out into the Savannah rain. The diner was called Valerie's, which meant nothing and everything. Elena sat in a corner booth with the coffee untouched in front of her, the cup having gone cold sometime around 3 a.m. Her reflection stared back from the dark window, hollow-eyed, soaked, the woman she'd pretended to be for 18 months dissolving in real time. The neon Budweiser sign cast everything in red, making her look like she was bleeding from the inside out. She'd saved one life. She knew exactly what it would cost her. The Pentagon had erased Captain Elena Martinez on a Tuesday in 2006. The Hindu Kush operation had gone catastrophically wrong, not during the mission itself, but after. A recording of her voice on a compromised radio. Call signs leaked to hostile intelligence. Operational security shattered like a windshield. The military solution was clean and efficient: burn the evidence. Classify everything above top secret. Delete her service record from every unclassified database. Forbid her from ever surfacing, ever working in any capacity that might draw attention to what she'd been. The penalty for violation was federal prosecution. Treason charges. 30 years minimum. They'd given her a new social security number, a correspondence nursing degree from an online program, and cash to disappear into the civilian world. 18 months of invisibility. 18 months of becoming nobody. She'd been so careful. She'd emptied bedpans and restocked supplies and never once let anyone see the hands that had held organs in place while soldiers bled out. She'd watched residents and medical students walk past her dozens of times a day, and none of them had ever seen her. Invisibility was armor. Invisibility was survival. Invisibility was the price of her freedom. Until she'd seen the blind veteran's SATs dropping and her hands had moved on their own. The waitress refilled the coffee without asking. Elena didn't touch it. The rain hammered the diner windows like applause, a sound that had followed her since the parking lot, since the moment she'd understood that Dr. Mercer wouldn't stop with just an administrative investigation. He would dig. He would call people. He would make this personal. At 6:15 a.m., while Elena stared at her reflection and the veteran's vitals climbed toward normal in the ICU above, Dr. Mercer sat in his car in the hospital parking lot with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to leverage. The hospital board chairman answered on the 4th ring. "Richard, it's David Mercer. I need a favor called in. Today." The chairman listened. Mercer explained about credentials fraud, about an orderly performing emergency procedures without authorization, about a lawsuit waiting to happen. The chairman agreed to convene the board. One phone call down. The second call went to the Georgia Nursing Board at 6:22 a.m. Mercer filed a formal fraud complaint, citing Elena's suspicious credentials, her pattern of overstepping her authority, her lack of formal education. He suggested the board investigate her employment history immediately. He mentioned the lawsuit risk. He suggested they move fast. The board promised to prioritize the review. 2 phone calls down. The third call was to a private investigator named Holloway, someone Mercer had used before to dig up dirt on competitors and troublesome colleagues. He gave Holloway Elena's name, her social security number, her address, and a simple instruction: find everything. Employment gaps. Financial irregularities. Where she came from before Savannah. Everything. Holloway didn't ask why. Mercer paid in cash for exactly this kind of incuriosity. He promised results by Thursday morning and hung up. 3 calls. That's all it took to trigger a cascade that Mercer had no way of stopping once it started. Back at the diner, Elena's phone buzzed at 6:06 a.m. A text from an unknown number: Cedar Creek Medical would like to confirm your administrative leave status. Please contact HR Monday 9 a.m. She read it once and set the phone face down on the booth table. The rain kept hammering. The neon sign kept bleeding red. Her reflection watched her with the flat, cold eyes of someone who'd already died once and knew exactly what was coming. The nurse in the ICU made another note at 7:03 a.m. The blind veteran's temperature had stabilized at 99.2 degrees Fahrenheit, fever broken, infection contained, vital solid. His hand still gripped the jacket. His lips moved in sleep, forming a single word: Valkyrie. 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 At 7:15 a.m., a routine background check flagged in the hospital's secure system. Elena Martinez. Social security number cross-referenced with federal databases. No results in the normal channels. The system automatically escalated to a deeper search, the kind that only runs on employees with sensitive medical access. That search hit a classified security clearance buried so deep in Pentagon servers that it triggered automatic notifications to 3 different agencies simultaneously. At Quantico, a Marine colonel reading morning briefings received an alert on his secure terminal. Unknown civilian with dormant DoD clearance. Location: Savannah, Georgia. Medical facility. He read the alert twice and made a call. In the Pentagon, a 2-star general received the same notification 30 seconds later on a different secure line. He'd been expecting something like this for 18 months. He'd been waiting, in case Captain Martinez ever surfaced. At Cedar Creek Medical, the hospital administrator received a call at 7:34 a.m. from someone identifying themselves as a Pentagon liaison officer. The administrator listened. His face went pale. He made 3 calls of his own. By 8:19 a.m., the boardroom at Cedar Creek Medical had been cleared of routine staff. Military brass were arriving. Federal officials. The hospital administrator was sweating through his shirt, understanding that whatever was about to happen, it had nothing to do with credentials fraud and everything to do with something he was not equipped to comprehend. Dr. Mercer received a call summoning him to the boardroom at 8:52 a.m. The administrator's voice was tense, clipped, different than normal. Dr. Mercer, can you come to the boardroom immediately? We have federal representatives here who need to speak with you. Mercer smiled. He assumed they were there to confirm Elena's fraud. He assumed his 3 phone calls had worked exactly as planned, that the machinery of institutional authority was now grinding against her, that he was about to watch his career vindication unfold in real time. He had no idea what was already in motion. At 9:03 a.m., the blind veteran regained consciousness in ICU. His sightless eyes opened toward nothing. He was confused, disoriented, the septic delirium finally lifting. The ICU nurse was checking his lines when he suddenly gripped her hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Valkyrie 6. I heard her voice. I heard her call sign over the radio. Someone stitched me up in the dark during the extraction. She was there. Valkyrie 6 was there." The nurse wrote it in his chart because he was so insistent, so certain. She had no context for it. No way to understand that she'd just documented the only external evidence of a classified operation that officially never happened. The rain stopped at 9:15 a.m. Elena was still in the diner booth, still staring at her reflection, when her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was military, clipped, precise, authoritative. "Captain Martinez, this is Marine Colonel James Clayton. I'm calling on behalf of the Department of Defense. We need you to come back to Cedar Creek Medical immediately. This is not optional." Elena set the phone down very carefully on the table. She picked up her cold coffee and drank it without tasting anything. Her reflection in the window stared back at her with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst thing the world could do. "I'm on my way," she said. By Thursday morning, the hospital's routine background check had flagged something buried so deep in federal databases that it triggered automatic notifications to 3 agencies simultaneously. Elena's security clearance wasn't just classified, it was the kind of classified that made bureaucrats nervous. The kind that made phones ring in offices where nobody ever answered directly. The kind that came with a code name. Dr. Mercer was standing in the hospital administrator's office when the Marine Colonel walked in wearing dress blue so crisp they could cut glass. Behind him came a 2-star general whose presence made the air pressure change. The general didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. The stars on his shoulder did that work. The colonel opened a leather folder and began reading aloud. "Silver Star, citation for Valor under fire, Hindu Kush operations, 2006. He paused. "Let that sink in." "Purple Heart, twice. Navy Commendation Medal with Combat via Bronze Star for tactical leadership." Each decoration landed like a judge's gavel. Dr. Mercer's face had gone the color of old pennies. "There's more," the general said quietly. His voice sounded like a tank idling in a garage, controlled power barely contained. In the ICU, the blind veteran lay in his wheelchair outside his room, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. When he saw the uniformed personnel walking past his corridor, something shifted in his expression. His hands gripped the armrests. His breathing changed. And then he whispered a single word into the silence. "Valkyrie 6. That call sign." That exact call sign had been spoken exactly once over a compromised radio frequency during an extraction that officially never happened 18 years ago in the Hindu Kush. He'd heard it in the darkness while somebody stitched him up without anesthesia, their hands moving with the terrifying precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times in worse conditions. He'd survived that extraction, survived losing his sight 3 days later to a secondary blast, only because those hands knew exactly where to cut and sew and tie. Only because that voice had said those words in the radio static, confirming the helicopter was coming, that someone was fighting for him, that he was not being left behind. Sergeant Marcus Wade's lips moved silently. Valkyrie 6. It wasn't a name. It was a promise made in the dark. The general entered Dr. Mercer's office and saluted, a formal, deliberate salute that made even the board chairman straighten up. Not a casual acknowledgement. A full, ceremonial salute to someone the Pentagon had deemed worth flying a 2-star general across 3 states to protect. Captain Martinez saved 11 operators during a classified operation, the general said to the room. 11 men who are alive right now because of her medical skills under fire. That's not a theory. That's not an allegation. That's documented in compartmentalized intelligence files that require presidential-level clearance to access. He turned to Dr. Mercer directly. "And you tried to destroy her for saving a veteran's life." A Pentagon official in a dark suit opened a sealed folder and placed it on the table. Inside was Elena's code name, her service record, her commendations. The general read the code name aloud, the name the Pentagon had given her, the identity she'd been forced to shed when the operation was officially classified into non-existence. When the Hindu Kush operation went so wrong it had to be erased from the record books entirely. "You made a fraud investigation request against Captain Martinez," the official continued, his voice flat as concrete. "That request triggered our review of Cedar Creek Medical's practices. He slid a tablet across the desk toward the board chairman. On the screen, altered patient records. Falsified timestamps. Diagnoses attributed to Dr. Mercer that had been completed by residents weeks before he claimed to have made them. 3 patients suffered complications, the official said. You altered the charts to attribute nursing errors to staff members rather than to your misdiagnoses. He swiped through the tablet. Here's an email where you took credit for Dr. Chen's cancer diagnosis. Here's a medication error you covered up, patient suffered a seizure as a result. You blamed your nurse. She was exonerated 2 months ago when we reviewed the original orders. The board chairman's expression hardened into something that looked like granite carved with a scalpel. Dr. Mercer, he said, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your locker. You will not be permitted to see patients, to access medical records, or to use this hospital as a reference for any future employment. Dr. Mercer opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The general stood. The 2-star general who had flown across 3 states to salute a trauma surgeon, a woman who had been forced to hide her entire identity to stay alive, stood and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back to look at Dr. Mercer directly. Every physician takes an oath to do no harm, the general said. You harmed your colleagues. You harmed your patients. You harmed a decorated officer trying to save lives quietly. And when she saved a man's life in an emergency, you tried to destroy her because she made you feel small. The general's jaw tightened. You should have considered who you were standing next to before you decided to attack her. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than a gunshot. By that afternoon, the private investigator Dr. Mercer had hired was providing all his findings to the hospital's legal counsel instead. The investigator had done his job too well. He dug up 18 years of perfectly clean service records, classified commendations, and security clearances. He dug up the kind of background that made it clear that Elena Martinez wasn't hiding anything. She was hiding someone. And that someone had saved lives the world would never officially know about. The Georgia Nursing Board investigator Dr. Mercer had sent a formal apology to Elena and opened an ethics investigation into Dr. Mercer instead. The board chairman, his golf partner, his ally, the man who owed him favors, personally walked him to the parking lot. Clean out your locker, Chairman Phillips said. Don't use me as a reference. Every weapon Mercer had sharpened turned backward in his hands. His medical license was suspended pending ethics review. Job applications to other hospitals were rejected within hours. His reputation preceded him like a GPS coordinates to a closed military installation. The only offer that came was from Coastal Community College, teaching CPR for $18 an hour, setting up plastic mannequins for people half his age, explaining chest compressions to high school students who would forget everything by next week. In his car alone in the parking lot, Dr. Mercer sat gripping the steering wheel, understanding too late what happens when you mistake quiet competence for weakness. When you mistake humility for vulnerability. When you try to destroy someone and discover they're not running from shadows, they're running from the weight of a classification level so high that the Pentagon itself has to personally arrive to confirm it. 6 months later, Elena stood in the lobby of Cedar Creek Medical in her full uniform for the first time in 18 years. The silver star was visible on her chest. Her rank was visible on her shoulders. Captain Elena Martinez, field trauma surgeon, instructor of field medicine, survivor of operations that officially never happened, director of the new veteran rehabilitation wing that Cedar Creek had built in her honor. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew 300 people. Nurses who had gone silent at the vending machine came to congratulate her, their respect earned through understanding rather than fear. The combat medic from the 82nd Airborne who had watched her field sutures 18 months ago had transferred to Cedar Creek specifically to work in her unit. He stood at attention during the ceremony, his uniform crisp as paper, his eyes filled with the kind of admiration that comes from knowing someone's true measure. Sergeant Marcus Wade sat beside Elena in his wheelchair, his sightless eyes facing the crowd. His scarred hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests. When it came time for remarks, he reached out until he found her shoulder, using that tactile anchor to locate the microphone someone had placed in his lap. I was invisible, Marcus said, his voice steady as a surgical laser. Everyone looked at me and saw a disabled veteran. A burden. Something sad to pity or ignore. But one person saw what I actually was, a person worth saving. Captain Martinez risked everything when everyone else gave up. She didn't ask permission. She didn't consider the cost. She just decided that my life mattered and acted accordingly. That's not just medical skill. That's honor. That's the kind of human being who should be leading us. Elena placed her hand on his shoulder. Her decorated shoulder. Her official, acknowledged, finally visible shoulder. Through the hospital windows, in a small community education room, Dr. Mercer set up plastic CPR mannequins for the evening adult education class. He arranged them in rows of 5. He checked the oxygen flow. He tested the defibrillator pads on a training unit. $18 an hour. No research. No residents to supervise. No authority. No influence. Elena walked past his classroom doorway with a team of cardiologists consulting on a complex veteran case. She didn't look in. She didn't need to. The past was past, and Captain Elena Martinez had moved forward into a future where she could finally exist as herself. The closing shot showed her walking through the same fluorescent-lit corridors where she'd once hidden in invisibility, now openly wearing her rank and decorations, carrying a stethoscope and the weight of a woman who had finally stopped running. A woman whose quiet competence had become visible strength. A woman whose silence had been broken by an entire Pentagon apparatus recognizing the truth: sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. And if you made it this far, you know Elena's story, but what about the ones still hiding? There are hundreds of them in hospitals across America right now, trained combat medics, field surgeons, tactical nurses working in silence because the world isn't ready to know their names. The Cedar Creek model changed that. Captain Martinez's protocols are now being implemented in Veterans Affairs hospitals nationwide, creating pathways for classified veterans to contribute their skills without compromising their security clearances. What happens when we stop treating hidden strength as a threat and start recognizing it as an asset? Subscribe to see how the next chapter unfolds, and let us know in the comments, would you have had the courage Elena had, or would you have stayed invisible?